Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Adi Achint. I have with me none other than Mr. Abhijit Chavda, who is obviously well known, and I am not going to be giving an introduction because that will be not right on my part. Uh, Welcome to the show, first and foremost. Namaskar, good afternoon. It's an honor to have you and a lot of inspiration. Uh, I think a lot of people have gotten into geopolitics because of a lot of the stuff that you're doing. So, firstly, thank you for what you do, and thank you for coming here.
Namaskar. Thank you for having me, and namaskar to the esteemed audience. It's a great pleasure to be on your platform. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, sir. Now, I wanted to ask you right at the beginning, where do you see the stand of India today? Because you've got a very interesting sort of a world of geopolitics opening in front of us. You've got the US playing games, you've got the Chinese sitting there, you've got the Pakistanis fingering around here and there, two, three major wars, 50, 60 other small wars. Where do you see us standing in the game? And then let's just open the discussion to the subjects that I've decided. So over to you.
Yeah, yeah. Great question. I mean, this is a period of great chaos. I think we are entering a period of chaos. Actually, the 2020s. It all began with the pandemic, right? The Wuhan virus, and then things just went. Then you had the Ukraine conflict, the special military operation. Now you have the Middle East crisis. The Bab el Mandeb Strait is being blockaded by the Houthis, the Ansar Allah faction of the Yemenis, and so on. There's so much happening right now. uh, China is obviously an issue. The US is, and the West is another issue. So, from our perspective, from the Indian perspective, I think we are doing a tightrope walking act, a balancing act. Uh, we are right now, one could say, a middle power. We're not a great power yet, and we are nowhere near a superpower yet. Let's be pragmatic. Let's be realistic, and we historically have been the greatest power, the preeminent power, at least economically. And with economic might, typically when you are politically united, whenever that happens, as a historical cycle, you also have military might. So historically, we have been the preeminent economic power, and sometimes we've been a superpower, like whenever we were united, and that's hopefully where our destiny lies. I mean, we are currently at a state where we are a middle power. We are slowly emerging. So I think from our perspective, we are right now doing a balancing act. We have multiple bigger powers that we need to kind of keep at a certain distance. Certain powers need to be kind of placated and appeased. Certain powers we need to show a stronger approach towards them. So that's where we are right now. And it's actually, this period of chaos may actually, if we do if we play our cards right, may actually work out to our advantage, because you have the US that is worried, really worried about the rise of China, and also the rise of Russia, because Russia is now rising again. It's an autarky. It's a nation that has everything at its disposal, all the natural resources, everything it could need. It doesn't need to import anything from anywhere else. So the US is worried about these two powers. Russia is actually militarily more powerful than China, mainly
Hmm.
because of its nuclear arsenal. It has the world's largest nuclear arsenal. And that's what the figures tell us. And then China obviously is has risen a lot. How far it will rise remains a question, because of the impending demographic disaster in China, and so much more happening. And the US itself is a declining power. The US, I mean, if you look at what's happening internally and so on, and what it's doing to Europe, I mean, it's clearly a power that's currently in decline. It's an empire in decline. So that's the and Africa, you have turmoil as usual. Africa is under colonization, even though the European powers don't have armies there, but it's still colonization by proxy. It's neo
Proxy.
colonization. Yeah, so it's colonization by proxy, and then you have various other powers that we need not mention because they are not that important. So that's the kind of geopolitical global scenario that we have right now. It's kind of a world that's lurching towards chaos. 24 is going to be an interesting year. Elections in India and the US. Russia, like you earlier said, is a kind of a given. Mr. Putin should win, and then you have election in Bangladesh, and the next year you have elections in Japan, and so on and so forth. So a
Hmm.
couple of years with very important elections coming up. Uh, so I think from our perspective, just to recap and answer your question, is that right now we're doing a tightrope walking act, a balancing act. We ideally need 20 years in which we are not involved in a major military conflict. If we do that, and if we have political continuity, political stability, then we're going to reach the 10, 10, 12 trillion dollar mark, and by that time it's going to be very hard to stop us, because by
Yeah,
that time our military muscle will also have grown to a proportionate extent. So that's where we are. We need 20 years of peace and growth, and for that we need to play the cards right.
absolutely. There's no question about it. Uh, Coming to play the cards right, there's one entity, if I may, which tries and actually off balances the game, and which is the left, the global left, which is there, and it's got its tentacles pretty much everywhere. We've seen that, from creating a pannu to Adani to whole lot of things which we see in front of us today. Uh, I do believe personally that the left has taken a big beat, starting from the Ukraine, starting from COVID. I think with the whole vaccine drama, then to Ukraine, and then now to Israel. It's pretty much like an open book for everybody to read. How do you see the global left today, and their, might I say, desperate actions against India?
uh, when I think of the global left, there's only one nation that comes to my mind, and that's the US, because the
Yeah.
global left is ensconced in the US. Okay, and they are all funded out of the US. So essentially, they look. The US is an interesting nation, a really interesting nation. It's a two-party system, a two-party state that is like one level above a one-party system, like China or North Korea. And both the parties have the same foreign policy. One party will bomb you with black colored bombers, the other one will bomb you with rainbow colored bombers, but they'll do the same thing. So it's essentially a one party system. It's not even a party system, it's something else entirely. It's just a dictatorship, essentially. It's an autocratic nation. It's a nation that's held together by the police force. Okay, you take away the cops from New York City for 15 minutes, there's going to be riots. Okay, that's the kind of kind of nation it is. It's held together by brute force. And the global left, it emanates out of the US. It's a very powerful tool of whoever runs the country. Obviously, by now I think it's clear that Mr. Biden isn't running the country.
Mm.
He is not capable of taking care of himself, forget about running the country. And Miss Kamala Harris, the less we say about her the better. She's clearly incompetent. So somebody is running the country. It's still lurching ahead. So whoever is running the country, we can call it the deep state or whatever we want to call it, but I think they control this global left. And the global left is a very powerful tool, this vague, amorphous, diffuse kind of thing that has its tentacles everywhere. I remember when I was a kid. In the 80s, okay, I once saw on TV this Soviet propaganda poster. It was called a propaganda poster,
Mm.
and in that they showed the US as an octopus with tentacles everywhere. So that's the kind of view the Soviets had of the US, that it was a multi tentacled hydra like monster that found its way everywhere. And the US used to call the Soviet Union the evil empire. So that's the kind of propaganda you had. So this global left is kind of like that octopus with multitudinous tentacles
Yeah.
that reach everywhere inside every country. And they clearly have assets deep within India, and not insignificant assets. I would say rather significant assets they have, without naming any entity or any individual, right? uh, so yes, and they have the global propaganda machinery at their disposal, which I mean the media is propaganda. By now I think the viewer should understand very clearly. By 2023 it should be very clear that media is nothing but propaganda.
Yep.
BBC is the propaganda arm of the UK government, which is a proxy of the US government. The CNN and Fox and whatever are proxy, are propaganda outlets of whatever else. Then you have the Chinese, then you have DW, then you have whatever else, right? So that's how it goes. We in India don't have a propaganda arm, because we are like, we believe in Gandhian values and so on. The point is, the global left has this massive media machinery at its disposal. And you gave some interesting examples. I mean, what they did with Adani, that hit job on Adani, which was clearly all fake, and many other things, right? So they have that. And I expect, I mean, I said this in the beginning of 23, this year itself, that this year you're going to see a lot of chatter on social media, a lot of hit jobs on social media
Yeah.
about India, that India's democracy is backsliding and India's devolving into fascism, and there's a same old stale stories about hindutva being an evil ideology and whatnot. I think we're gonna see a lot more of that in 2024, the first quarter at least, before the Indian general elections, and you're gonna see a lot more also happening. I mean, India, they would like India to rapidly descend into some kind of chaos of some kind, maybe terrorist attacks. We already have a situation in India's far east. Everyone calls it the northeast, it's actually India's far east, okay? And we
Paris.
have Manipur. Yeah, we have Manipur, which is a state which is at least half of which is under foreign occupation. And these foreign occupiers are not Burmese. They don't even speak the Burmese language or practice Burmese culture. They have emerged out of China's Yunnan. Okay. So half of Manipur is under foreign occupation right now. And these these occupiers, these infiltrators, they, on the other side of the border, they are fighting the Burmese government. Now, now we know who is supporting the anti-government forces in Burma. It's the US. It's well known. They have multiple ways of supporting these anti-government proxies of theirs in Burma. And the same proxies are occupying half of the state of Manipur. That's the situation in India's far east. Then you have the recent news of what's coming, that's emerging out of Jammu and Kashmir, more infiltration from POK, from Pakistan occupied Kashmir. So you're gonna see the global left's media propaganda machinery that's going to be unleashed upon us, and you're going to also see some harder actions taking place on the ground. I mean, recently, I think section 144 has been imposed in Mumbai because of some terrorist activities that that were caught and apprehended and all that. I think we need to be really careful in India the next 3 4 months. I'm sure the government is more than aware of this. So yeah, that's the situation. So coming back to the global left, they obviously would like to see a regime change in India, and the global left is part of the U.S. State Department or whatever departments toolkit. It's part of their arsenal. It aids and abets regime change operations by setting the ground, by setting the tone. That if you want, let's say, regime change in Bangladesh, uh, you spend a year putting out op-eds and hit pieces about Sheikh Hasina, that she's evil and she's a dictatorial lady and so on and so forth, and then you convince the people of Bangladesh who read English that this is the case, because it's all coming from high up, from the BBC, from the CNN, and whatnot. So it's all propaganda, and that's how you prepare the ground for the eventual regime change operation. So they would obviously want a regime change in India in 2024. They would like a weak coalition government to come to power, because such a government would be way more pliable, and that would make India a much better, more amenable resource for them to exploit. So yeah, there we
Hmm.
are.
There's one theory that I'm kind of looking at right now emerging is the factor that you have the factions within the, if you call it the deep state, which are kind of splitting from each other, because you see the, um, what do you call, Soros getting hit, they are kind
Mhm.
of getting wiped off from India. So there's this one thing which is kind of going towards the other side, and then you also have a right which is emerging pretty much everywhere in the world. You can see spots of right everywhere. I mean, it's interesting to see that style of government emerging and pushing back really hardcore. Even in America, if you look at it, I was watching this video with Vivek Ramaswamy. It was a very interesting, the way that he speaks. I don't think he'll win, but he's bringing out a certain voice which was hidden. Where do you see these guys, who's the opposing faction, which I call probably the new deep state, which are not so ideologically inclined, because they say, "Yaar, paisa banao, boss. It's money. You can run your ideology only if you're rich." These monkeys are going to drive us into the ground. So, what do you say to that? What is your observation onto that?
Yeah, there is indeed resistance to the global left's insidious agenda. That's like a globalist agenda. It's a monocultural agenda and all that. There is resistance in various countries to this. You see this in Italy, because Madame Meloni is now in power. She has been described as a fascist, you know, and so on. But on the other hand, you have Mr. Macron in France, who actually is a leftist, and he actually has a quasi-independent foreign policy, which the Americans don't like. And then obviously we have people like Mr. Ramaswamy in the US, and he does represent the right. I mean, it's very strange to see an Indian American on the right. Typically,
Right.
all Indian Americans are like sheep-like in supporting the Democrats. Sheep-like
Yeah.
mentality. They just don't think, "Nee, Democrats ko vote karenge." That's it. And they actually fund the Democrats. They give copious amounts of funds to the Democrats. I don't know for what reason, but that's something that's beyond me, beyond my comprehension. So you have Vivek Ramaswamy now, and he's emerged as the most articulate and most persuasive leader in the Democratic in the Republican race. I don't think he wants to run for president. I think he has a bigger goal in mind. I think he's targeting the 2028 general elections, the
Yeah.
2028 elections. This time, he's hoping that Trump will make him his running mate, and I think it'll be Trump Ramaswamy if Trump agrees to that. So I think that's what Vivek is, because if you study his pronouncements carefully, you will see that he has steadfastly refused to utter a single word of condemnation against Trump. He has never criticized Donald Trump. So he is very clear, he's very smart, and he's a really smart guy. So he may, I mean, I'm not sure if it will happen, but Trump may pick him as a running mate, possibly. I
Yeah.
mean, he has totally destroyed Nikki Haley by now. Okay, exposed her as a as a corrupt fraud and all that. So who else is left? DeSantis. I'm not sure Trump
Mm.
likes DeSantis too much. He once called him DeSanctimonious. Right. So I think it could be Trump Ramaswamy. And then it'll if Trump actually does win, it's gonna be his second term, and so 28 Trump won't be there. And by that
Yeah.
time, Ramaswamy could be the front runner. So that's the kind of game plan I think Ramaswamy has. But coming back to your question, there is definitely uh, a right wing pushback coming across in various parts of the world. The problem is that the global left is coordinated. It is actually a single entity, and there is a leadership group somewhere that coordinates and everything and directs everything. In the case of the right, it's all isolated pockets of right. In each nation you have a right wing, but they don't coordinate their efforts across
That's
countries.
true.
So it's
Mm.
all it's like we Hindus, we are all we are all decentralized, and we all have our own little pet agendas, and we have our own ways of doing things, and sometimes it matches, sometimes it doesn't, and it's like complete it's a cacophony. So the global right is like that. The left is well coordinated. I think it's a mono. It's a. I think it's just one organization that has its tentacles spread across the world. Definitely in Europe, definitely in North America, probably in South America as well. And they started infiltrating India in the early 90s, and by now they have significant assets in India as well. Uh, I would say that the academic system in India is certainly taken over by the left for sure. That happened in the 70s,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
I'm not mistaken. And then yeah, and then they found new patrons in the 90s. So the Indian academic system works against the interests of the nation, especially the humanities departments, and we have been very kind to them by allowing them to set up camp even in the IITs. I mean, in the IITs, in the Indian Institutes of Technology, you have departments of humanities. Okay, you have
Mm.
Department of Sociology and Department of God knows what. I'm not, and if you look at the kind of research they are putting out, good God, it's appalling. I'll not go into what it is, but you
Yeah.
can
Yeah.
you can check it out. It's all out there in the public domain. Why do we have departments of sociology and gender studies? I'm not sure if gender studies is there, but why do we have humanities giving degrees in IITs? By set up Indian Institutes of Humanities. So I mean, I'm again digressing, but my point is that the global left has significant assets in India and in most nations across the world. Uh, in Russia as well. In Russia as well, they have
Mm.
some.
Mm.
Okay,
Mm.
yeah, yeah,
Mm.
yeah. They do. China, I'm not sure. The Chinese have done a proper purge. I believe Mr. Xi Jinping is extraordinarily paranoid, so I think he's done a proper purge. Anybody who comes under the slightest suspicion disappears. So that's how it works in China. So I think there is a right in every country, but it's not a global right. It is not a global right, but in the case of the left, it's a global left. It's cohesive, it's unified, and it has a leadership group somewhere that is kind of hazy and invisible,
Yeah.
but it's there out there.
I started smiling when you said you should have a humanities and arts college. I mean, it's like putting all of them together is like a time bomb. That's gonna be a place where when you probably enter and you get magnetized or something like that. Grow horns and a tail or something. It's quite interesting that
Yeah.
this is the game. But I want to ask you now. Let's get into a little specific domain. When we look at the balance in the world, right? China wanted to overtake the US and become the number one. I seldom refer it to as a Chinese century because I think it was less than a decade. I think 8 7 8 years is what China had for itself. Uh, and today, I think China wants to feel relevant. And I am a firm believer of the fact that the Chinese created this tamasha with the Hamas and Iran and all that nonsense. There's enough stuff to come out and say that today. The last time when this ship was getting hijacked, by the way, by the Houthis, uh, the distress call went to the Chinese. They didn't respond. The tunnels have been made by Chinese engineers. A lot of work has happened there. A lot of those pipes have gone from China, and China does this. I mean, let's face it. So, where do you see that particular entity and vis-a-vis India? They've kind of had a very quiet approach for the past 1 year. Since I think the Yangtze incident, it's just quiet, just hands off. I think both the parties are like that. How do you see China going forward? And of course, sorry if I may, the little newborn friendship in quotes uh, between US and China.
Right. So I think the Americans are by now aware. Obviously, they're aware, but I think they have reached this firm understanding that China is not going to be the major power or the major threat for them in the next 30 40 years. Okay,
Yeah,
for the time being, it's a threat for sure, but it's not rising anymore. Economically, it's growing at what, 5%, 4% per year, according to official GDP figures, maybe 6% per year, but their GDP figures are typically inflated. So China kind of has reached where it's going to reach, and eventually the decline is going to start because of the demographic issue. The one child policy has come home to roost. Okay, and the total fertility rate in China has dropped to abysmal levels. It was 1.2, 1.1 last year or so, which is a disaster. Which is a disaster. It's a catastrophe by any metric. uh, so the Chinese population is projected to become half of what it is by 2100, and it's going to be a really old population. I think right now the median age in China is in the mid 40s or something, the average age of the average person. By 2050 it's going to be in the late 50s. Imagine a nation where the average person is 58 years old. That's not a nation that's going to be a threat to anyone. I mean, where are they going to get the fighter pilots and everything from? Okay, you can use AI for certain things, but how far will it take you? That's the thing.
yeah,
So China, if it is if it is managed properly from the US perspective, is not a long term threat. The long term threat, I think they see India as a long term threat. I mean, not today. India is just a middle power today, but you give India 20 years and India is going to be the next China from their perspective. Okay, they may see it like that. I mean, you have to be paranoid in geopolitics and see
yeah,
everybody as the reaching their full potential. So I think China is definitely a very relevant and very powerful nation today. It's not a superpower, but it's a great power. It's the one great power in Asia. Russia is kind of an Eurasian nation. So China is the preeminent power in Asia. And the only nation China is worried about is obviously India, right? Uh, and China, obviously, we know they have always had this thing that they wanted to prove this to the world and to themselves, that they can play a global role, especially in diplomacy and so on. So they have been at the forefront of bringing across this rapprochement between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The two nations had broken off diplomatic ties after the execution of Nimr al-Nimr uh, in Saudi Arabia, who was a Shiite cleric.
yes,
And that's
correct.
why the Iranians broke off relations with the Saudis. So the Chinese brought these two together, and it's not like they've become friends, Iran and Saudi Arabia, but at least they are talking to each other now. So the Chinese have claimed, credit for this, and the two nations gave them credit. And the Chinese have inked various deals with the Saudis, obviously about energy. They have this 25-year-old strategic agreement with Iran, which involves, I don't know, $400 billion or something. That's the alleged figure. roughly, and so on. So they want to be uh, very much involved in the Middle East. And like you said, their engineers have been aiding Gaza. I mean, the Chinese obviously they know that that Israel is their number one ally is the US, and US is the enemy. So enemy is my friend, and so on, um, and so on. It's a complex thing. The Israelis actually in the early 2000s they wanted to invest in China. They wanted Chinese money, and they were willing to sell technology and
Anything.
stuff. I mean, they actually sold them the blueprints of the Lavi aircraft, the derivative of the F-16 fighter, which eventually became a Chinese plane. That's clear cut. The Israelis did that, and then the Americans stopped them. That you cannot proceed any further from here. Stop. Dealing with China, and then the focus shifted to India from Israel's perspective. So we have to look at things realistically. Nobody is your best friend. We are all here for our own personal benefit and so on. But China, yes, I think it's going to be relevant, very much relevant for the next 30 years at least, uh, until 2050. But it depends on how we manage it. That, like you rightly said, the last year or so, the India China LAC, the undemarcated LAC, has been much more calm than it has been in the last 3 years, because the three previous years, because there used to be these fist fights and rock fights and stick fights and
Yep.
whatnot between Indian and Chinese patrolling parties. You had the Galwan incident in which 80 Chinese died, 20 Indians died. I mean, roughly, allegedly, whatever. So you had all that happening, but now it's kind of calmed down. Now, what has caused the Chinese to calm down? One wonders. I mean, there are things that we can't see. I only have access to information and data that's out there in the public domain. That's all I
Yeah.
have. I don't have any, privileged information. But something has happened that has made the Chinese kind of, calm down. Something has happened. I'm not sure what it is. Obviously, you don't. There are no hugs and handshakes in these things. You're only uh, the only way to negotiate and to get your opponent to behave is through some kind of leverage, some form of leverage. So I wonder what leverage we've utilized, but we have got the Chinese to calm down. And yeah, their infrastructure building activities have actually ramped up on the other side of the border. They have started making tunnels under mountains and creating bunkers in the mountains to safeguard their
Protect.
assets. Let's say assets. Yep, they've been doing that. So I think they're anticipating some kind of trouble there, because the Chinese positions across the LAC in Tibet and in occupied Ladakh are totally like bare. They're totally visible. There's nowhere to hide. There's no forest cover or anything. So everything is clearly visible. So
I'm sorry.
yeah, so that's the deal, right, with China. So I think China is going to be definitely very much relevant the next 30 years. And the Americans now, like you said, they are kind of trying to bring China to the negotiating table. Mr. Xi visited the US recently. He had that walk in the park with Mr. Biden. I wonder what was said. Oh yeah, it has been reported that Mr. Xi told Mr. Biden that China will eventually reunify Taiwan, whether it likes it or not. When it will happen, remains to be seen. But it will. Mr. Xi says he would want a peaceful reunification. But the two nations are talking right now. They are trying to. I wonder what the US is looking at. Maybe they want to create a G2 kind of grouping, and talk. The preeminent grouping in the world, and take things forward from there. I think the US is now looking long term, and maybe they are seeing us as a bigger threat than China long term on the 20-30 year horizon. And China in the 20-30 year horizon may not be a big threat the way it's going. So that's how I see it right now. But for us, from our perspective, the number one threat is China. That, like, it's a real and present danger for us. It's right across the border. We have never had a border with China in 3,000 years. China has existed how long? 3,000 years. If you want to be charitable, 3,500 years. We have existed 10,000 years at least. So we've never had a common border until the 1950s, when
Recent.
the
Yeah.
Chinese when our government allowed the Chinese to take over Tibet. So that's the situation that we are in, and for us it's the number one threat, not Pakistan. It's China. That's the number one threat.
The most interesting thing that one can actually, see from the current scenario, especially from China, is that, and I read quite a bit about China. They One thing they say is that they didn't expect the factor that India will become a second front to them. So that's one miscalculation that they kind of admit to. Their CICIR think tank, which is the most prominent one in Beijing, that's what they say, that there's one mistake. If whatever we did, we should have resolved it before it went on to a longish fight where now we have to split ourselves. And we keep giving these indications that we are studying Taiwan, we are studying this, we are studying that. So they're a little worried about this, and they've actually downgraded Japan, as a threat. That's very interesting to me, because they're very
Hmm.
scared of the Japanese, very scared of the Japanese. Although such a
Yes.
small country against that, but they get very
Hmm.
frightened. Let's come to the factor that USA. You said that they would want to build a G2 sort of a thing. Um, Here is something which I find very interesting, because you have a USA who's got two options in the world today. One is a complete revisionist system, a revisionist power, which says de-dollarization, which says get out USA, just out you go, right? And then you've got reformist powers, which are guys like France, India, who say, okay, the current system is not bad, it's served us for this much time. Let's twist it to get in the realities of tomorrow, right? The today and tomorrow. Let's involve that into the game, and let's see how we can derive a new system out of it. Uh, where do you think the US looks at itself? Because one thing that I see is they're also reorienting themselves. Uh, if it was any other country at any other time, Ukraine, they would have been US troops. Israel, they would have been US troops, but they're kind of keeping a distance. They're putting a show of force, but no troops on the ground. So it's a very interesting shift of the game by the US. How do you see this, the US kind of making a difference between the world going forward? I say this because Minister Jaishankar, if you remember his talk with the Council of Foreign Relations when he was in America, he mentioned this. He said that the US is smart enough of rebalancing itself for the new world order. And that was said in front of Walter Bede, who's a big proponent of the new world order and stuff like that. So how do you see that the US reorienting itself?
Right. That's an interesting question. The US is definitely a different power than what it was in in the 90s. In the 90s, we had this unipolar moment. They had won the Cold War. The Soviet Union disintegrated. The Gorbachev was doing Pizza Hut ads or whatever it was. He was doing all that. And the US was at the peak of its power. And since then, they have somehow slowly but steadily crept downwards. And right now, it's clearly a power in decline. But it's still the preeminent power. It's still the superpower. It's still a nation that can intervene anywhere militarily at 30 minutes to 60 minutes notice. Anywhere in the world, anywhere in the globe, they can do that. Uh, and then you have this revisionist power, the two revisionist powers, China and the US and Russia. Not the USSR, Russia. China and Russia are revisionist powers. They want the old system to be gone. They want to create a new system, or they want to bifurcate the system and have two parallel systems like the
Yeah.
old Cold War. And we are essentially in Cold War 2.0 because we are kind of slowly, gradually, we are in the process of perhaps going into that sort of a bifurcation of the systems. So that's where we have China and Russia, and on the other hand, we have other powers like India and France, and Japan to a certain extent. I'm not sure Japan is very sovereign as a nation, but let's say India and France, these two nations would like some reforms in the system, and obviously India is driving that. India has been very clear that the UN Security Council needs to be reformed. The United Nations itself needs to re-examine its relevance in the world and what its actual role is, and so on. Because the UN Security Council, the structure reflects the realities of 1945, not 2023. Like, it's been almost a century since it was constituted in that manner, and it needs to evolve. Otherwise, it will lose any relevance. So India and France would like reforms. Now, how does the US see this? I think the US is more comfortable with autocracies than democracies, to be very clear. Okay, they prefer working with autocracies because autocracies get things done. Dictatorships get things done. They were very comfortable with someone like Saddam Hussein. They are very
Yep.
comfortable with various tin pot dictators they have installed across Africa.
Pakistan.
Pakistan is a great, you know. It's interesting, Pakistan is a very interesting example that you just given. This came to my mind. The Pakistan, most nations, this is like old cliche, right? Every nation has an army. In Pakistan, the army has a nation.
Yeah.
And Pakistan is on the brink of being a failed state. But imagine a Pakistan kind of nation that is successful. It's a military that has a nation, and they have these sham elections and all that going on in
Hmm.
their nation. Which nation comes to your mind? A successful Pakistan, a successful version of Pakistan. I think that's the US. The US, imagine a Pakistan that was successful, that's the US. And they have really succeeded to the wildest extent of their dreams. They own the whole world. So that's the kind of nation the US is. It's actually an autocracy. It's a military industrial complex oligarchy autocracy, which has a two-party system to placate the people. It controls the nation through this extensive and brutal police force network and the highest rate of incarcerations in the world, and so
Yep.
on. That's the US. But the US is declining internally and externally. I mean, the one thing that gave the US empire legitimacy was that it could safeguard the so-called rules-based world order. It could safeguard the shipping lanes of the world. And see what's happening in Bab al-Mandeb. They are unable to stop these little Houthis, the Ansar Allah faction, from blowing up ships. They are unable to stop this allegedly terrorist outfit, which they want to redeclare as a terrorist outfit. They are unable to stop a terrorist outfit from blockading one of the most critical shipping lanes in the world. So their legitimacy as the global supercop is evaporating right in front of our eyes right now. uh, but they still are the superpower. And
Hmm.
so what kind of world do they envisage, or what kind of world are they trying to create in the next 30 years, by 2050, let's say? One thing I see happening is that they are destroying Europe. I think the US actually sees Europe as a potential threat. If Europe were to reunify, or no, forget about reunifying, if Europe were to unify and acquire for themselves an independent foreign policy, then the Americans start seeing visions of the Third Reich. Okay,
Yep.
soldiers marching and all. If Germany and France were to somehow set aside their differences and unite, and then reject NATO and create their own foreign policy, it could be a nightmare for the US. So the US is preemptively taking steps by changing the demographics, altering the demographics of these nations, and sapping away their vitality and their very identity. You see what's happening in Scandinavia. All these foreign immigrants rampaging across these three nations.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
happening in Spain? I mean, hordes of young military age men, only men, no women, no children, alleged refugees coming into Spain and just pouring into Spain from North Africa and other parts of Africa. You know what's happening in Germany? The very identity, the very essence of what used to be Europe is being sapped away right now in front of our eyes. And Europe is being starved of energy. We know what happened with Nord Stream. Then you have the Ukraine war and this vital energy that they were acquiring from Russia, which was driving the European growth engine, the industrial engine. It's been cut off. So now they have
Cut
to
off.
import LNG from the US at three times the price, and that's why these nations are going into recession. Germany is in a recession, and so on. The Americans, I think, they see Europe as a major threat, and they want to ensure it never emerges as a threat again, to just destroy the essence of Europe, the very identity and very demographics of Europe. So that's what I see happening in Europe right now. So if you can't rule them, destroy them. That's the kind of thing. And China, I don't think the US is worried about very much. Even if Taiwan goes, I think the US will be prepared to write off Taiwan, because they've already transferred TSMC to Arizona and where not. So they're going to be fine. So if the Chinese try to take Taiwan, all these semiconductor plants, everything will be blown up, and the Chinese will be left with a hollow victory, with just an island, a shell of an island, and nothing else left. That's what's going to happen if the Chinese try to do that. So Taiwan could be easily written off by the Americans, but yeah, it breaks China free of the first island chain. It gives them a little more leverage and all, but that's fine. So I think
Hmm.
the US is currently acting like, historically, we have seen empires rise and fall. We've seen so many empires come and go. Uh, we've seen the Roman Empire, we've seen the Ottoman Empire, we've seen the Byzantine Empire, we've seen lots of empires. And typically, when an empire is falling, it lashes out and tries to destroy everything in its wherever it can. So maybe the US could be beginning to act in that manner, perhaps. They're destroying Europe right now. They would be willing to go ahead with the destruction of Taiwan. If the Chinese try to take Taiwan, they destroy everything, and there you go. Take your hollow victory, your Pyrrhic victory. And then you have Japan and South Korea. So these are two other US assets. Now, people don't realize this, but Japan is not a sovereign nation. There are more than 130 permanent US military bases on Japanese soil. Okay, Japan is under occupation. It's under
50,000.
permanent US military occupation, right? Uh, and the Japanese government cannot take any significant decisions regarding foreign policy or military policy or economic policy without the express approval of the Americans. They simply can't do that. So this is a nation under occupation. The elections are just, well, just for an eyewash. South Korea itself is under US military occupation, and it's a state of not war but not peace either with North Korea. And North Korea is a Chinese proxy. It used to be a USSR proxy. It's now a Chinese proxy. So that's the situation right now. Um, so yeah, that's where we are. It's a very confusing, chaotic period of history we are entering. The 2024 2025, I think it's going to be very tumultuous, very chaotic. This decade, it's going to totally reshape and realign the global chessboard, so to say, the geopolitical chessboard. That's where we are. And the US could end up becoming a destructive force more than a force that is positive and contributes to the well-being of the world. That's a possibility we have to consider seriously.
Hmm. Now that's dangerous, because you've actually just, that's like the Russian dead man switch.
Yep.
The nuclear
Yeah.
dead man switch. If I die, boss, kiss yourself goodbye, because I want to take everybody else. But in any case,
Hmm.
let's not go there. My point about the revisionist system that I kind of was hinting to is, I'd like to take that forward. You've kind of put across a very interesting paradigm. We also see the US now building certain power centers in the world, right? You may say whatever is happening within India and stuff like that, it's great. These things are, as Mr. Modi said in his Financial Times interviews, that these are small hiccups in a rather long relationship, and that's the same volume which is coming out even from the State Department uh, within the US. So there are power centers coming up, which is, of course, the US at one side. You've got Poland, which is rising up for the north. Finland, Sweden, kind of, building up something over there. You've got now, after this war, one thing will be there is the Israelis are going to be out of their slumber. They're going to be woken up and they're going to be, ready. The Saudis becoming a big voice. They've kind of kept the whole Middle East at bay during this war. And we'll come to the war probably after this. Then you got India, which is, you know, growing and growing in spite of all the games, by the way, all the games possible. And then you've got Japan, a declining country, but still a very powerful country in the East. Uh, is this sort of a new multilateral order that what people talk about, that, yeah, this is my Western Hemisphere, leave me the hell alone. Here you are. You want this, you want this, you want this, you want this. I will give you. Japan, I sit in. Israel, I sit in. Center, you guys handle, and I'm figure it out. Russia, I will deal with at my own game.
So
The
it will
only
be
country
great if,
doesn't
yeah,
fit
please
into
go
this paradigm is China.
ahead.
Is because, and you see the way China is being treated today. And that's something which I keep wondering, that why have they. I call it the country that is going to go into the ash heap of history. So
Right. So from the US perspective, it would be great if they would actually do that. That
yeah,
we'll take care of the Western Hemisphere. We'll sit in Russia. We'll sit in Japan. We'll sit in South Korea. China can do whatever it wants, and India can deal with the subcontinental region and so on. I wish it would be like that. That would be great. But they don't. They want to poke their fingers everywhere. They want to kind of interfere in the Indian electoral process. They want to keep supporting Pakistan. We must not forget. I mean, it's past history, but the Americans funded and financed Pakistani terrorism against India for decades. They did that. They supported the genocide in Bangladesh in 71. So that's past history. But even now, they are supporting Pakistan. Asim Munir was in Washington D.C. this very weekend, wasn't it? This very week, he was there. He met with
Meeting home.
Blinken and Victoria Nuland. That lady, my goodness, I'm scared of her. She scares me. She scares the heebie-jeebies out of me. So yeah, he was there, and wherever she's involved, there's chaos. Chaos ensues wherever she goes.
Yeah.
So they're clearly up to something. They're not leaving India alone. They're not telling India that you can take care of the subcontinent. We'll leave you alone there, and we'll
No,
take
no,
care of the
no.
rest of the world. No, they're not. So they want to have a say in everything. That is the kind of rules based world order that they have for themselves. That a set of rules applies for us and a different set of rules applies for everybody else. And we will decide what the rules are, in what circumstances, and on what day. That's how they behave. And that's probably the reason why the world has kind of lost respect for the US, because they're a hypocritical nation. They talk about human rights, they talk about democracy, they talk about rules based world order, but they follow none of those things. For them, whatever they do, it's totally fine. So so you have, like you said, this multipolarity emerging right now. I think this phase of multipolarity, where you have these various powers emerging, uh, which seem kind of independent, I think this could be a passing phase. You mentioned Poland. Yes, you have Poland that's kind of rising. It's rising because it's got US support. Okay, the Americans understand that Ukraine is gone. The Ukraine war is lost. I have been saying since 2022 February that Russia is going to win the war, and today that's what's happening. The Ukrainians have lost the flower of their demographics. That's the young
Yeah.
men. There's no young men left in Ukraine. Old men are being recruited. Guys in their 50s and 60s are being recruited to fight in the army. Pregnant women are fighting in the Ukrainian armed forces. It's horrific what the
Horrible.
Americans have done to Ukraine and what Zelensky has done to Ukraine. Okay, and it's just a matter of time before Russia achieves its objectives. And because of that, the Americans are now propping up Poland. They are creating, turning Poland into the new European military superpower.
Mm.
Now Poland has a new leader now, and just see the kind of policies they have immediately implemented. Immigration is now allowed into Poland. Multiculturalism is allowed, which means you're going to create a monoculture in Poland as well, and so on. So give it 5 years, and you will see a very different Poland emerge just in 5 years. Okay, it's gonna look kind of like the Ukraine under Mr. Zelensky. I get the feeling.
Oh my God.
So yeah, so I hope it doesn't come to that, but you know, so Poland seems to be emerging, but it's another artificially propped up nation. They're becoming a military power because of aid from the US, because the Americans want to use Poland as a temporary bulwark against a possible re-emergence, resurgence of Russia after Ukraine is gone, after Ukraine has been reincorporated into Russia. Uh, so that's where we are. We are indeed in an era of kind of multipolarity. We have a number of powers that are emerging, middle powers, let's say, not great powers, potential great powers. France is one. France has always been a nation that has had a quasi independent foreign policy.
Yeah,
They've
yeah.
never been, yeah, they've never been happy to be a
Conformist.
part of NATO.
Mm.
Yeah, France is the only nation in Europe that is not under US occupation, actually. You
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
Spain has US military bases. Italy has multiple permanent US military bases, which no one talks about. Germany is under US occupation, just like Japan, with a few, with some, not that many military bases, but the Americans have military bases. Ramstein is a good example, and so on and so forth.
Yep. Yep.
Uh, the Dutch have US nuclear weapons on their soil. They are being made to harbor those nuclear weapons on their soil. Turkey has
B-61s.
US nuclear weapons on their soil. So the US actually occupies Europe. Turkey is a kind of state that straddles Asia and Europe, but there you go. So that's the thing. France is the only nation in Europe that has a quasi-independent foreign policy. It still isn't able to, free itself from the clutches of NATO. It's part of NATO and so on. So they have to play the game, but they have their own nuclear deterrent, which is independent of the US. The UK has a nuclear deterrent. Okay, they have a couple of submarines or whatever, but their nuclear missiles are American missiles. And I can assure you that Rishi Sunak does not have that big red button at his disposal.
Mm-hmm.
That red button will be in Washington. I assure you of that. In the Pentagon or Maryland or wherever, right? That's where it's going to
Look
be.
at their carrier. They've got a carrier, but no ships to go along with it.
Yeah, I mean, what's the point of having a career if you don't have the protective umbrella
Truth
around it,
enough.
right? So yeah, so I think France is one of the powers that would love to emerge out of the shadows of the US and become independent again. India obviously is a very independent nation, at least under Prime Minister Modi. And that's something the Americans don't like at all, because India makes its own decisions. And of course, we've had this issue this year, right? In 2023. Let's recap 23 and look back at 23. We had the Trudeau affair. Okay, he accused India of the assassination of Nijar, some insignificant gangster or whatever, and then the Americans have accused India of trying to bump off that Pannu character. Pannu obviously is a crackpot American wannabe terrorist. He has said he'll blow up the Indian Parliament, he'll blow up an Air India flight, and all that. And the Americans have a long history of harboring anti-India elements and terrorists on their soil. They harbor
Anti
the
everybody,
killers of,
anti
yeah,
everybody.
yeah, yeah.
Tell me whose
The
elements they don't
Americans,
harbor.
indeed, the Americans and the Brits, both. So, the killers of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman in Bangladesh, I think some of them are in the UK and some of them are in the US. Okay, known killers, and the Americans are fine with harboring that. Uh, David Headley was a US citizen. Okay, and
Hamas
the
leaders
Americans
are there.
refused. Yeah, and the Americans have refused to give India access to Headley, because who knows what secrets he might spill out, if India gets access to him. So the Americans are not India's friend. Okay, now now they have accused India of doing this, and because of that, uh, they have withdrawn Mr. Biden's attendance at the Republic Day
Oh,
summit.
oh.
And yeah, and they had hoped to embarrass India by doing that, but you know what happened? Mr. Macron stepped in, and he found the right opportunity to snub the US, and give one back, and he's gonna be the chief guest. Uh, so look, from the US perspective, they can keep doing this. They'll play good cop, bad cop. They will use India for their ends, but they're gonna keep on pressurizing India, keep on needling India, keep on poking India, and keep on hurting India in various ways. And from our perspective, we have to bide our time. We have to wait another 20 years. So right now, we're gonna be conciliatory. We're gonna say that these little things happen here and there, but our friendship is gonna endure, and so on. We're gonna say these things, but we have to understand that it's a matter of biding our time. We have to wait 20 years and keep working really hard at growing our economy, because as our economy grows, so will our military. It's a matter of 20 years. It's a crucial time for us. Until then,
Yeah.
we're going to have to develop a tough skin and swallow all these insults and all these pokes and jabs, and so swallow some pain as well. We are swallowing pain in Manipur right now. We have swallowed some pain in Jammu and Kashmir. So it's a time to play defense right now. We should not be aggressive. I know Indians are like very impatient and very emotional people. Why don't we take back POK? Why don't we do this? Why don't we say that? Are say what's the point of saying anything? Just bide your time, get stronger. If you are like a 60-kilo guy and you have a 120-kilo guy against you, you're not gonna beat him by saying tough, by using tough language or try to threaten him. You go and lift weights, wait 20 years and get really strong, and then you can talk. So that's where we are right now.
Arthashastra says that. So,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
we are the, I mean, we carry forth the legacy of Vishnugupta Chanakya, but we kind of seem to have forgotten his teachings. So we need
Yeah.
to remind ourselves every day.
I mean, so-called, they term it to Deng, hide your strength, bide your time. That was said by
Yep,
Chanakya 2000 years ago. So,
indeed.
CCP, cut, copy, paste, That's my full form of it. Anyways, I'm going to ask you two more questions. And guys, after that, I'm going to get into your questions. There's about 2,000 plus people sitting with us on this Sunday afternoon. We will get into your questions and ask Abhijit about your queries about what we're talking about. Two small questions. One is I'm of the thought process and open to critique here. I put myself out there before as well. So my thought process is that this whole US assassination ploy, if I may, it's interesting. Let's say they prove it, which they can't because they'll rat out their sources.
Yeah,
Um, let's say they prove it, we win because a lot of countries, lot of countries will turn around and say, "Yeah, boss, let's not take pangas with India. This guy started coming inside and doing all this. No, 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 you elements, you just go back." There are loads of elements, anti-India elements all around the place. So perception-wise, we will still win. Yeah, you'll have a little, don't do this, yeah, and all that nonsense, which is happening even now. So I don't see any, because we are guilty without being charged, even, I think, at the moment. So that's fine. Second thing is, if they don't, like, they backed away like Adani, we still win. So I don't know why, but I really feel that they've kind of misstepped this, and they kind of did it because they wanted to save their little bacha in Trudeau, and now they don't know how to take this forward. So there's a frivolous court case coming across, there's this, there's that, whole lot of things coming across. But I think it's gonna just die its natural death, but brought out whenever needed. How do you what do you say to that? Because these guys were losing leverage against you. I'm of the opinion this whole Khalistan, this, that, all that stuff is just to keep that hook against you, because you're doing this on your own, you're doing that on your own. Somewhere they say, yeah, listen, hello, I'm the big daddy here, you know, let's work together. So some sort of a leverage they want to keep with you. What do you say to that?
Right. See, in all international relations, in all negotiations, in all diplomacy, the key element is leverage. Who
Yeah.
has how much leverage? And when it comes to India-US relationship, it's an asymmetrical relationship because the US is way more powerful than India, and they have most of the cards. They have so many cards to play. One is the Khalistan element. You have Khalistani anti-India elements. Khalistan is a non-issue in India, but uh, these Khalistani elements are ensconced and safeguarded in Canada, in the US, in the UK. You have Khalistanis in even in Australia and New Zealand. The Five Eyes
Hmm.
nations, the Anglosphere, they're spread all across this place. The Pakistanis, who obviously hate India, they're also spread across these five nations. So these are various cards that they have, and then you create, then you. So when it comes to this allegation of this alleged Indian assassination plot against this insignificant Pannu fellow, I mean, there's two possibilities. One possibility is that they have overplayed their cards. Okay, that's one possibility. That Trudeau made this allegation, and then the Americans backed him up, and they can't prove it, and they can't disprove it. They cannot, like you said,
Can't.
if they, if,
Yeah.
yeah, if, like you said, if they try to prove it, they're gonna have to rat out their sources, and that's gonna be like it's gonna be those guys gonna be burned. They can never operate again in the game, in tradecraft. So that is they put themselves in a situation where they have made a claim, an allegation, but they can't prove it. So take me at my word. I killed Osama bin Laden. I will never show you any evidence, but you do believe what I say. That sort of thing.
Exactly.
So,
Hmm.
so they have gotten away with this multiple times. They said they killed Osama, but they never showed any evidence. Till now, we have not seen any evidence. But yeah, the world says that yes, the president of the US announced this, so it must be true. So if you can get away with this once, you think that you can get away with it again. So I think that's one possibility, that they have just made a claim and they're not going to produce any evidence, and they expect the world to just take their words at face value. That's one possibility. The second possibility is that they may be preparing the ground for something more. Okay, so if you want to do something bad against a nation, you first prepare the ground by creating this media onslaught and making all kinds of bad allegations against India, which
Directions.
has been happening throughout this year. That India supports Russia in the war against Ukraine. India has taken the wrong side, and India's decision will echo in history as they made the wrong choice and they supported the dictator, the evil guy. And India abstained at the UN in voting against Russia. I mean, that's again an evil choice. There's been this onslaught, this barrage against India in the media, and then you throw in this allegation that India is now trying to assassinate people, innocent US citizens on US soil, which makes India look even worse. So Modi is going down the same fascist dictatorial way that Xi Jinping and Putin are going in. So then you can perhaps do something more. Maybe use Pakistan to do some harm to India, like go across certain lines perhaps, or something like that. I'm not sure what exactly it could be, but there are a couple of possibilities that I can think of. One is that they have done a total. It's been a total blunder, or secondly, it's part of a long-term plan of maligning India
Yeah.
and eventually, unleashing some kind of pain on India.
Yeah, I mean, long term plan is damn. I would do that. Okay, now I'm in soup. Or rather, well, make some merry out of it. Yeah? Figure it out. How do I put some
Yeah.
salt and pepper and make it tasty? Well, so that's, and my last question to you would be about Pakistan. What do you think is happening there? Is Nawaz Sharif army approved?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the last part.
I'm saying, is Nawaz Sharif army approved?
Oh, Nawaz Sharif. I have not really been keeping track of Nawaz Sharif. I think he's in the
Your gut
UK.
feel, your gut feel. What do you think is going to happen here? They're
Look,
losing
I
land. That's one thing I know of. They're losing land,
mm,
and it's dangerous.
yeah, the Taliban situation is a problem for Pakistan. The Taliban, I mean, the whole world thought after the Taliban took over Afghanistan, after Afghanistan was handed over on a plate to the Taliban, the world thought that now now Pakistan has won, and Afghanistan is going to be Pakistan's strategic backyard and all that old stuff. But the truth has turned out to be very different. The Taliban are a bunch of Pashtun nationalists, and they regard the Durand line as unfinished business. And Pakistan has a huge boundary issue with Afghanistan. It's an unresolved boundary, and the Afghanistan, the Taliban, the Afghans want Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and all those territories back, because that has historically been Pakhtun territory. And we'll not go back to the history of Maharaja Ranjit Singh and what he did
Yeah.
and why he did that, but that's the thing. So Pakistan is losing territory clearly. Now I'm not sure what the situation with Nawaz Sharif is, but things aren't really looking very good for Pakistan. And things never look good for Pakistan, but Pakistan always somehow keeps on getting bailed out by somebody or the other. So for the first half of the 21st century, Pakistan's big daddy was China. The Americans had lost
Mm.
interest in Pakistan because of what happened. So the Chinese had stepped in, and they were Pakistan's big daddy until the Imran Khan era. And
Fiasco.
then there is this regime change in Pakistan. Imran Khan is thrown out, and then this new thing comes in, and then the whole thing changes, and the Americans get involved again. So now
Yeah.
America is the big daddy of Pakistan. The iron friendship with China is over; it's only words anymore now. Um, so Pakistan will continue to exist as an entity, as a counterweight to India. That's why
Mm.
the British created Pakistan, and after the transfer of power from London to Washington, the Americans used Pakistan as leverage against India, and they have done it very well actually in the past. So I'm not sure what the situation with Nawaz Sharif is. Is he army approved? Well, if you look at Nawaz Sharif's career, he's never been army approved. He's always tried. He has tried time and again to give him credit, to kind of mend fences with India. And every time he tried that, he got backstabbed by the army. The first instance was when Musharraf backstabbed him with the Kargil, the whole Kargil fiasco, uh, and so on. So Nawaz Sharif has, I think, tried to mend fences with India on various occasions. When he was last prime minister, he even hosted Mr. Modi for an impromptu meeting in Pakistan when Mr. Modi was coming back to India from somewhere in Central Asia and so on. I'm not sure what the situation is right now, but overall, Pakistan is a nation that can fragment anytime. It's only external forces that are keeping it together. There are too many internal problems in Pakistan that if you just leave the Pakistanis to themselves, it's just going to disintegrate in a matter of
Ooh.
like 3 to 5 years for sure.
We saw what happened on the May 9th. They'll
Yeah,
destroy each
yeah,
other. I mean,
yeah.
that
They
was
will. Yeah,
dangerous. The army kind of
yeah.
stepped back for one day, and we saw what happened. So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, that's a dangerous scenario. I mean, before I go into the questions, I'm reminded of this phrase that is written in, an article written by Seymour Hersh about
Mhm.
Pakistani nuclear weapons. And he said that, when you ask the Pakistanis, do you know Americans have a plan to denuclearize you and stuff like that? So Pakistanis say, yeah, we know all that.
Mhm.
So, but as a joke, Pakistanis always say, you'll get everything, but the two kept in the tall grass next to the runway. So, and they say we only need one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that's the kind of country that you're dealing with, right, guys? Let's
Yeah,
get into
that's
your
right.
questions, and please like the video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and as I said, this is a special show, so please, some extra likes would be helpful. That's all I'm asking for. And guys, as you know, you can contribute towards the DevTalks efforts using the QR code up there, or you can use PayPal, which is down in the description, or super stickers or super chats. Let's see. Aditya, thank you so much. What's your opinion on Catalina independence movement from Spain? Despite they contribute a lot to the Spanish GDP, but they're still ignored.
Yeah, they have been fighting, striving for independence for decades, right? They have been doing that for a very, very long time. Barcelona is the Basque capital, Catalonia.
Mm.
And that's a movement that I remember first hearing about when I was a kid. Like I was a kid, and I was always interested in international affairs. And I was like, "What's happening in Spain? There's some big protest happening," and they wanted to secede from Spain. Uh, and they don't. quite see themselves as Spanish, most likely. Their
They don't.
language
Yeah.
is different. Yeah, their language is different. Their culture is kind of different as well. Uh, and so that's why I think they want to secede from Spain. But as long as the Spanish government is more powerful than the secessionist movement, it won't happen. And look, if they are being, I think the sentiment is that they are kind of being marginalized, and that they have never been given their full due, and they're not getting the same treatment as the Spanish speaking people and all that. So that is the situation. What is my view? I mean, my view is that it exists and it's interesting for me, but I don't support one party or the other. It's not my fight. Okay, I would like to see peace in the world, and I would like to see justice and fairness wherever possible. If they feel that it's kind of there's another such movement. There are many such movements. Okay,
Money.
yeah, I mean, for example, there is Quebec. The
Mhm.
people of Quebec have always wanted to secede from Canada, but somehow or the other, it never happens. They are totally different from the rest of Canada. They are French-speaking people. They are a legacy of the French colonization of
Yeah.
North America, and they have their own separate kind of culture, which is not the Anglo culture. It's totally different. The French and the Anglos
Yep.
don't like each other. I can assure you
Yep.
of that. You go there, you will know. So the Quebecois also want to secede, but they have never quite succeeded in doing that. The Scots want to secede from the UK. The Scots hate the English. Okay, look at the past history. Look at the past 1,000 years of history, and you will see how badly the British, the English have oppressed the Scots, and yet Scotland is part of the UK and so on. They even stole their coronation crown. The
Mhm.
British, the coronation stone. There used to be this stone in Scotland, in Edinburgh or wherever it was,
Yeah.
and this stone was used for coronations. The English stole that stone. I mean, why can't you get your own stone? But they stole the Scottish stone, and it was last used for the coronation of Charles, so-called King Charles. So the Scots hate England, and still they have not succeeded in seceding from England. There was this movement in Texas, the Lone Star State.
Yeah.
The
Mhm.
Texans secede from the US, and so on and so forth. So there are so many of these movements around the world, and you will find others in other parts of the world as well. So my I don't really have any strong views about this. It's interesting to see this. I mean, it kind of tells you. Uh, it hints at what happened historically in these places. Wherever you have secessionist movements, it tells you that there are people who have been brought into a political entity by force, and they don't quite belong there, and that's why they want to leave. And it's
True.
interesting to see this from a historical perspective. I mean, historical analysis is quite interesting because it tells you what it teaches you about cause and effect. So yeah, that's what.
Absolutely. 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 And some of them have been planted as well. Adinath, thank you so much. He says, "Sir, I have a friend from Jordan who says Hind is supposed to be the balance in the world, but after its support for Israel, there's no balance left."
Okay, so I would like to tell this friend from Jordan that we are very sorry that we have disappointed you and not lived up to your high standards. But we have our own national interest, and we're going to follow our national interest. Our
Very
national
so.
interest is our priority. Your feelings, even if they may be hurt, they are not our priority. We are very sorry for that. We apologize,
And
but we don't apologize.
if you do come to India, we'd like to buy you a beer and kind of make up.
Yeah, yeah, pakka.
Bharat Grover, thank you so much. Two of my favorites on geopolitics. Please accept my regards. It was amazing to interact with both of you on JD Summit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Lovely to have met you in Jaipur.
So, I this next person, I wonder why he's kept his name. I call him AMCG. Thank you so much. He says, I think the West wants to use India, but they want India on the knees kissing the ring, which isn't happening. That is why they are using trade as carrot, Wahhabi left as a stick. We will be attacked continuously till elections. So I have this theory which is known as the Sino-Wahhabi leftist agenda. Okay,
Mhm.
it's a little heavy when you actually think about it. So it's all mixed up together. So what do you have to say to that?
I kind of agree with AMCG. The West does want to utilize India as a counterweight to China. That's the only utility they see for India. I mean, when I say the West, I mean the US. India is the only nation that can counterbalance China in Asia. It's the only nation that China actually fears, even though they may not say it. So that's the utility that India has for the US. But they want India to kowtow to them. They want India to, open up everything to the US. They want India to not grow as a large economy, as a manufacturing power, but they want India to exist as a market for their industries and their economy. That's what they want India. That's the role they want India to play. So India should essentially fulfill that role for them. That's what they want, and that's not happening. Obviously, India has a strong government now, a very strong leader, and a person with a vision, and India is going in the direction that is best for itself, and that's why the West is not happy with this. The US is not happy with this. So trade is a carrot, and the left and the Wahhabi and all that as a stick. That's quite actually quite accurate, and we will be attacked continuously until the elections. That's also true. That's going to happen.
Absolutely. Aditya, once again, thank you so much. So, your thoughts on of government actions against terrorist attack in JNK? Apparently, the soldiers have been beheaded by terrorists. Uh, this thing, a disclaimer: nobody's confirmed that as of now. So, let's keep it at that.
Look, we are at war. Please understand something. We are at war with Pakistan. Even though
Thank you.
we officially have not declared any war and they have not declared any war, Pakistan, as long as it exists, is going to keep on attacking India in some form of, or the other. So, you know, 1947, there was a threat of civil war. Muhammad Ali Jinnah said, we will have partition or we will have civil war. And Mr. Gandhi said, okay, I don't want civil war, let's do partition. Well, today we have a nuclear armed civil war. Okay, they are our own people, but they are our enemies, and they will not rest until they either destroy themselves or they achieve their great dream and vision of conquering New Delhi and establishing, flying their flag over there. So Pakistan is always going to be a problem, and we are at war with Pakistan. And when you are at war, certain things happen. Okay, for us, we have to. The problem with Indians, and I'm not pointing fingers at anybody in particular, but I'm just saying generally, as Indians, we are a very emotional people. Something happens and we are like, oh, yes, sab ho gaya, now we need to do something. No, stay calm. In war, you're gonna have casualties. Okay, that's the unfortunate reality of war.
Sad part
Okay,
of it.
we
Yes.
that's the sad part of war. Yes, these are individual tragedies. These are individual tragedies. But we have to understand we are a nation of 1.4 billion people, and we have to have a long-term vision. Where do we want to be in 2100? And what is the price we will have to pay for that? And sometimes we have to, unfortunately, very, very unfortunately, and very sadly, swallow some pain so that we can look forward to and work towards a greater future. That's unfortunately where we are. So I think the government will have a certain pain threshold. If the Pakistani actions are below that, we're going to not take any action. We're going to wait until the elections are done and then maybe take action. Action will be taken at a time and a date of our choosing. But if a certain threshold is crossed, maybe some action will be taken promptly. We'll have to see about that. So I think we are on the right track. I think this government really means business. It's demonstrated in the past that it's not going to tolerate any BS from Pakistan, and eventually there's going to be consequences, or maybe sooner, depending on what happens.
Absolutely. I second your opinion with all my weight. And I say this very clearly that by pressuring the government or the forces into action, you're actually putting unnecessary pressure on them. Remember,
Yeah,
these are matters of life and death. This is war.
yeah,
Look what's happening in Israel. Don't put pressure on your forces. These are guys who've never let you down in history, no matter what government, what anything else. They have fought till the last tooth and nail for this country. So don't put
yeah.
pressure on them. They know what they're doing. As a matter of fact, what they're not telling you right now, as you guys know, I'm just going to take 10 seconds. One of our panelists, Colonel Ajay Raina, he stays in that region. I've not been able to get him on the platform for a week now because there's no internet. So there is obviously something happening there. Let's calm down. Let's wait for the right guys to tell us what is happening, and then we will have discussions on this as a strong civil society. I think we will do that. AMCG once again. Thank you. He says, "Thank you, Chavda sir. You are the reason I started learning geopolitics. You're the reason I found AIM and Adi. Thank you. Your live streams where you analyze reality of different countries, friendship with India is still my favorite."
Thank you so much, sir. I'm very honored. Thank you so much.
So Shaktiman, thank you so much. She says, "What's better for India, Democrats or Republicans?"
It's the same thing. Exactly
It's
the
the
same
same.
thing. The same foreign
Absolutely.
policy. Doesn't matter.
Yeah, doesn't matter at all. Absolutely correct. Sodium Syndicate, thank you so much. He says, can Hindus connect civilizationally with Native Americans and revive their religion with Hindu syncretism to gain subnational leverage over the USA? My God.
Okay, soft power isn't leverage. Soft power is never leverage. And the Native Americans have been marginalized so badly they don't matter anymore. Unfortunately, that's the
Yeah.
unfortunate reality. They have been genocided beyond belief. At least 100 million have been wiped out. And those who survive are not even pure blood anymore. I mean, whatever that means, but and they really have been made completely insignificant. So all we Indians have this obsession. I don't mean to point fingers at anyone, but we Indians have been made to believe that soft power is our greatest asset. Soft power is nothing. Soft power is non-existent without hard power. Your soft power matters only once you have actual hard power. So forget about soft power. Start building. Focus on building hard power. That's all that matters in the world.
Absolutely. Alpha Max, thank you so much. He says, Asimuni meeting Antony Blinken in CENTCOM shows any signs of upcoming Afghanistan Pakistan war that Blinken wants contained. Concerns for India?
Look, Pakistan may want to take some action against the Taliban in Afghanistan for sure. It's possible because they have been losing some territory to the Taliban. That border is not defined at all, so anything happens
Yeah.
anywhere. Uh,
Mm.
is it concerning for India that Asim Munir met Blinken and Victoria Nuland? It's extremely concerning. I I don't really, we are friends with Afghanistan. We wish them well. We want Afghanistan to prosper for the first time in decades, all that. But it's concerning for us because it doesn't really affect me what happens in Afghanistan. But if the Pakistanis have some designs against India and those have been, you know, and that's in tandem with the US, then that is concerning for us. So I'm not sure what was discussed, and definitely India would have been discussed. 100% India would have been discussed, and maybe India would have been discussed in detail, in depth. So please understand that there are no friends in geopolitics, and there are no permanent enemies as well. There are no friends in geopolitics, and the US is definitely not India's friend. The US sees India as a long-term threat. Okay, so from that perspective, this meeting is very concerning. Okay, this tin pot dictator meeting the US foreign secretary of state and that Newland lady is very concerning for us.
Absolutely. Maitri, she asks, what can we learn from history from geopolitics of today? What could history hint about future challenges?
Yeah, good question. History and geopolitics, the connection. Look, what if you study history enough in sufficient depth, you will start you will start recognizing certain patterns that happen over and over again. there are there's something called the dynastic cycles in China. Okay, it's not something that's only exclusive to China. It happens everywhere. So you will start, if you study history in depth and in sufficient detail, you will start seeing that there are certain patterns that recur over history, that keep on
Yeah.
recurring. Okay,
Yeah.
and you will start understanding the connection between cause and effect. If this happens, why do things happen and why do other things not happen? So you will start understanding causality, what causes certain things and what causes other things and all that. And if you start analyzing history from that perspective, from the perspective of causality, of cause and effect, then you will start understanding geopolitics as well, because the same principles that apply to ancient history, past history, apply
Copy
to
paste.
today's geopolitics. So
Yep.
that's why studying history is important for understanding geopolitics. Without studying history, you simply can't understand geopolitics. And yeah, that's all I'll say about that.
Akruti says, global left is the new East India Company.
um I wouldn't say the global left is the East India Company. I would say, look, this is how I see it. We had the East India Company, we had the UK, the British Raj that allegedly left India in 1947. Okay, that's what happened. And then
Yeah.
what happened to the British Empire? I mean, in the beginning of the 20th century, the British Empire was the preeminent superpower in the world. The sun never set on the British Empire, right? It spanned the entire globe. And then what happened is that the British Empire declined. Why? Because of the rise of the US. The US
Hmm.
was this great nation, protected by two enormous oceans, the Pacific and the Atlantic. Nobody could touch the US. And the US had these inexhaustible resources. the entire continent of North America, more or less. Even Canada is a proxy of the US. It's a vassal state of the US, all right? Canada.
Yeah.
So the US rose as a superpower, as an economic and military superpower, and the UK declined. And in 1958, the UK made one last desperate grasp for superpower status again, the Suez Crisis, and the Americans pushed them down, and that was the end of the UK as a power, as a global power, as a first class global power. So what happened is there was a transfer of power from London to Washington DC, but the same infrastructure, the same structure continued. So the British Empire simply transferred its headquarters to Washington DC, and it still exists. It's the same culture. It's the English speaking people, right? It's the Anglosphere. So the same empire exists, and it's actually become even more powerful today. And that
Yeah.
is, well, the continuation of the East India Company.
AMCG, thanks once again. He says, Adi, AMCG is actually my YouTube channel, also represents gamers who love video games. That was my nickname because it's so long to say that average middle class gamer. And I'm no authority to call you average, brother, so not gonna happen. Just a comment. Ankitaji, thank you so much for your super sticker. We have a friend from Afghanistan who says, let's suppose India plans to take POK in today's situation. What could be their options? She's from Afghanistan, so you got to give her that little discount.
Namaste, Nargis ji. Welcome to the show, and lovely to have you. So here's the thing. I'm not sure if you've seen the movie Enter the Dragon. So that's a very famous and iconic movie, Bruce Lee's great movie. And there's a scene that he's traveling by boat and to some place, and this New Zealand guy who wants to fight him. So then Bruce Lee says, "Okay, let's go to that island over there, far away on the horizon. Let's get into this boat and go there, and we'll fight over there." So this New Zealand guy gets into the boat, and then Bruce Lee simply cuts the boat loose. And then it tells him that the best way to fight is to fight without fighting. You win without
Yep.
fighting. So the ideal way to win is to win without firing a single shot and taking a single
Let it
casualty.
fall in your hand.
Yeah, let the prize fall into your lap on its own volition. So I don't think, see, like I said, India, it is very important for India not to be embroiled in any major military conflict for the next 20 years. From that
Absolutely.
perspective, we don't want to start a fight for POK. Let it fall automatically into our lap. Pakistan is a nation that's always on life support. Okay, it can disintegrate at any time. The only reason it's not disintegrating is because it's being propped up from outside. Earlier by China, now by the US. A time will come when Pakistan will disintegrate on its own, and we'll have to not fire a single shot. That's the best way to win.
Last two questions. Awasthiji, he says, we have been seeing these war fronts in Ukraine and Israel open up for the past couple of years. According to you, where will be the next front to open up, and who will be the likely to instigate from behind?
Okay, so you're asking me to make a prediction. Look, I don't make predictions, but I can tell you what are the potential flashpoints globally.
Yeah.
We obviously have the Ukraine thing, which is kind of simmering down. Ukraine has more or less lost the war. Okay, then you have the Middle East crisis. That is also kind of contained now. Okay, it's also going into the slow war phase right now. I don't
Hmm.
see it, becoming a major conflagration once again. So it's kind of contained right now. So what are the other global flashpoints? You obviously have the India-Pakistan thing. Okay, the Pakistanis, if they are given money and instigated, they may start something stupid with India. That's, I think, a slightly unlikely possibility right now. India has become too powerful for Pakistan to tangle with. Okay, then you have the India-Tibet border, the undemarcated India-Tibet border, which is the India-China, de facto India-China border. Uh, Look, India is not going to start a war with China. But if China, for some reason, does something incredibly stupid, you could have a problem over there. That's one. That's another far-fetched scenario, in my opinion. I don't think the Chinese are as stupid enough to
No.
do that because they stand to lose a lot. Okay, then you have the Taiwan Strait issue. So that's another potential flashpoint. But once again, like I said, the best way to win a war is to win without fighting. And the Chinese kind of try to follow Sun Tzu's stratagems. So they would like to take Taiwan without fighting. But if they do something stupid, that could be an issue. Then there's North Korea, which is a Chinese proxy. I mean, they could use North Korea to start something with South Korea or with Japan or with even somewhere else. And what else do we have? And then you have China, Japan, which
You
is, I
got
don't
all
see as a
over
very problematic.
Africa. You got Venezuela, Guyana. You got
Yeah,
loads of
yeah, the,
flashpoints
the
around.
Venezuela Guyana thing, which will not be a major war. It's going to be a local contained war if it
Yeah.
does happen. If they do annex the territory, and then you have Africa, which is like all lawless, and you had. You had Niger. You have this coups happening, the coup belt, the Sahel region of Africa. You had a coup in Niger, you had a coup in Mali, and you have coups happening randomly, like like nuclear decay, radioactivity, that sort of thing. Coups happening all the time. And France seems to be like kind of losing its grip on this region. It used to be the francophone region. You have the CFA franc that's in that's the currency that's used over there. So there are various nations in Africa that are very volatile, unstable. There is obviously Yemen, okay, the blockade, and then there's the Iran issue, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and
Yeah,
any potential. There's always a potential threat there, and then you also have Somalia and the piracy thing. But these are all minor things. So these are the major problem points, flashpoints, potential flashpoints in the world. I'm
yeah,
not sure
yeah.
what will happen where, but that's where we are.
Yeah, I think you've hit the nail on the head there. I think the potential biggest flashpoints will be where superpowers are kind of
Yeah,
number two in the game. You know,
yeah.
either or superpower is there number two in the game. That's where the danger is. Otherwise, a war where the superpowers are third, fourth, fifth in the chain of game, some amount of support, TK, and all that. I don't think those have the potential to kind of really damage the world. But
Yeah.
you know, that's interesting. And the last one, Full Metal Jacket, Full Metal Heart. Thank you so much. He says, "Sir, with the implementation of immigration rules coming in the West, won't it give leverage to India in implementing stronger UCC and NRC and human rights?" Silent.
Look, there is no uniform, rules based world order.
Something like that. Yeah, yeah.
One set of rules applies to the west, and another set of rules applies to the rest of the world. So if India does it legally, passes an act of goes through and through parliament and does it properly, and you will still have the human rights lobby and everybody rising up against us, in rising up in arms against us. You bring in the UCC, it's going to be global chaos in the whole world. I mean, the so-called uh, the global world order will just rise up in unison against us. That how can you do such a thing, even though they do the same, they have the same laws. they,
Hmm.
they, they all have a uniform civil code. But if we do it, that's going to be a problem for them. If you do the NRC properly, my goodness, imagine the outcry. We are now all fascist and all that. So I don't care what immigration rules have come in the West, but if India does it, it's going to be still chaos. that, that's just the way it is.
Thank you, sir, for spending this wonderful afternoon with me. And I think the audience have really loved this interaction. And, I can see that with the amount of comments and the people that have stuck around for this thing for about an hour and a half. Normally, my podcasts are long. It gives time for the speaker to kind of speak and for us to take some questions from the audience as well, so that they also get involved in the whole thing. I try and do that so that, it's a holistic sort of an affair. Thank you for sticking around for that. It's a pleasure to have you, and hope to get you back sometime in very soon in the next year, if I may. On that note, wish you a very good year, season's greetings, and I really hope all of us find peace and quiet in our country and go through what is destined for us. On that note, Jai Hind, Jai Bharat.
Jai Hind, Jai Bharat. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much.